Hey guys, I know! I told you I was gonna get on a regular upload schedule, or at least I told myself I was going to, and then it just never happened. My last video was like 2.5 months ago, and now I've kind of turned into Garrett Watts because I keep saying I'm going to, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do it, and then it just doesn't happen. So this video, being long overdue, is something that you guys have requested a bunch, and I'm going to be repainting a doll to look like Chucky. It was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy it, and let's get into it. So today we're going to be using epoxy sculpt, which is the same stuff we used for the Annabelle doll, but I also have these new nifty sculpting tools along with these silicone brushes, which are really good for this kind of sculpting. I highly recommend. First, we're going to start off by removing the original paint with an acetone-based nail polish remover. After that, I'm going in with an X-Acto knife, cutting off the high points of the face on this doll so that it'll be easier to sculpt Chucky with the epoxy sculpt. After this, I'm sectioning off the hair because the version of Chucky that I'm doing, he doesn't have hair on the sides of his head, or at least not like this. So I'm just sectioning it off and cutting it with the X-Acto knife, trying to get as close to the scalp as possible. And then once it's all cut off, I'm just gonna go back through with the X-Acto knife and get any of the high points that I missed. Then I'm going in with epoxy sculpt and I'm smoothening out the surface. The technique that I'm using is I just put the epoxy sculpt down and then I use water either on the sculpting tool or on my finger, and I just try to blend it out as evenly and smoothly as possible. So after that's finished, I'm going to go in with the epoxy sculpt and build up the brow bone as well as the cheekbones and just blend it out using the silicone brushes. Then I'm just filling in that gap that we created with the X-Acto knife, building up the nose, evening out the mouth area, and just blending it out as much as I possibly can. Once it's all blended out, I dry it off, and then I go in with the sculpting tool, create an indent, and move on to the mouth, which was the most difficult thing to sculpt, by the way. It took a while to get it the way I wanted it to, just because of how small the doll is, and the sculpting tools that I was using. It was just a task, but eventually you'll get it to the way you want it to, and sometimes you have to start over, and that's okay. Then I'm building up the nose ridge again, restarting on the nose, just trying to get it the way I want it to, using a needle to create the nostrils, and then going in with the sculpting tool and just trying to blend it out as much as possible. The key is blending it. So that's what we're doing. We're also just evening out the brow bone yet again. Then I'm going in with the epoxy sculpt to create the wrinkle in his nose, and I'm going in with an X-Acto knife and cutting out the eye sockets, because instead of doing it the way I did it with Annabelle, I wanted to try a different approach, and so I'm using the ends of a pin or a needle, whatever you want to call it, and I'm just using those as the eyes. So I'm blending it all out. I'm taking the epoxy sculpt, blending it throughout the face, because I remembered, hey, the version we're doing of Chucky is the one where he has all the gashes on his face, so I need that epoxy sculpt there. Now I'm going in with some sculpt, and then the pins that I was talking about, or the needles, whatever you want to call them, and I'm just pushing them in, not too far because I don't want them to push through, because I had that happen a couple times, and I'm just building up the brow bone again, creating the eyelids, and just blending it using the X-Acto knife to cut the top portion of the eyelid and then moving it down to the bottom, because that was the easiest way I figured out how to do it. And now I'm just trying to clean everything up, build up the nose ridge yet again. I do that a lot because eventually with all the blending that I did, I just kind of erased it. And I'm just building up the brow bone a little bit more, evening out all the little things that I didn't notice until now. And I'm just trying to blend it all out, make it as even as possible, because as you can see, some of it is a little lumpy. So I'm just going in with the sculpting tool and having it wet and then just blending it as best as possible. So after what seems like a million years of doing that, I'm finally going in with a needle and creating the iconic gashes Chucky has in his face, and I'm just trying to get them as best as I possibly can, going in with a needle and then going back in with the sculpting tool to create deeper or wider gashes depending on what I want to do. Then I'm cutting off the hands. Trust me, you'll see why I cut them off. But anyways, I decided to sculpt Chucky's outfit rather than making it out of fabric, just because I thought it would be easier with all the tiny little details that Chucky has. And I'm just going in with the epoxy sculpt, covering the entire body with it except for the shoes and the neck. And then I'm just blending it out as best as I possibly can. Not super worried about lumps because it is clothes. They're not perfectly smooth or straight, especially his overalls. So I'm just blending it out, trying to make sure it's covering all of his body. And then I'm going in with little bits, creating the cuffs on the bottom of his overalls. And then with this piece, I'm doing the top of his overall. So I'm creating that ridge at the top, but blending it into the bottom to give that illusion that he has overalls on. Then I'm creating his overall straps, getting them where I want them, and then flattening them later after I get them how I want them to be. Then I move on to his cute little buttons. I just create two little spheres, and then I press them down with the sculpting tool, use the needle to create the buttonholes. Then I create his little pocket, blend that in, and now I'm moving on to the cuffs on his wrists, poking the hands in there so that they'll stick, let it dry, and then I'll glue them in later. I'm going in with a stippling tool to create that texture on his overalls and his shirt. After this, I am moving back to his mouth, where I'm going to sculpt his teeth. I'm using the silicone brush, but it proved to be a little bit too big, so the best thing I found was to go in with that needle and sculpt his teeth out. It took a lot of trial and error, as you can see, but eventually I got it to where I liked it, and I just moved on to painting him. I'm starting off with a nice white base coat. Then after that, I'm moving on to his sweater, following the pattern from my reference photo, and just continuing from there, painting the back of his sweater. And then once I'm done with that, I'm painting on the overalls with a nice sky blue. After this, I'm trying to recreate his unique pattern he has on his overalls, where it's the cowboy boots, the fireman's hat, the axe, and I'm just recreating the shapes as best as possible because I want it to have that uniqueness to him. I'm also writing good guy, then I'm going in with yellow, creating all the other little shapes that are on his overalls, going back in with a couple different colors to create those fine details, and then I'm just moving on to his face using a watered down red, going in with a watered down blue, and then a watered down yellow to give it some dimension before I put on the skin tone paint. Then I'm going in with a dry brush of blue to just go over the overalls, and then a white brush to go over the sweater to give it a little bit more texture. Now I'm going in with the skin color and painting all over Chucky's face and hands. It's a little lighter than I wanted it, and so I just went back in with a darker color for the second coat. After this, I'm going in with a bunch of different shadows and shades from just a regular makeup palette, and I'm going in with browns and oranges just to give his face a little bit more dimension and give it some more texture. Now I'm going in with a maroon acrylic paint, and I'm just painting into the gashes of his face and on the left eye. After that, I am going in with a lighter pink and painting on the second eyelid. Then I'm going into the mouth, and now we're moving on to the hair. I'm using a bunch of different orange copic markers, also browns, and just trying to recreate that reddish brown hair that Chucky has, which it took a lot of different colors to get, but eventually I got it to where I wanted it to be. The only problem with the alcohol markers is that it makes the hair super sticky and super stiff. So after I went in with the copic markers, I did end up washing the hair once just to rinse out any of the residue left from the markers, which it did hold its color pretty well, so I am happy with that. See, I'm trying to brush it out, but it is super stiff. So then I'm moving on to the eyes, using a really fine paintbrush to paint in the color. Then I'm also painting on his teeth and doing any other fine details that I need to, like his stitches. Then I'm also painting on his eyebrows, going in with black and then white to finish his eyes, painting his little knife, which is going to be a nice little treat at the end. So now I'm just going in with some shadows, finishing that up, and then I'm parting his hair and going in with some E6000 glue, using that extra hair that we saved away and gluing it onto his part and also in the back, so that it looks more natural. Then I'm taking little pieces, gluing it to the side of his head, because this version of Chucky has pieces of hair stapled to the side of his head. Why? I have no clue. But we're just gonna let that dry. Now I'm cutting his hair, cutting it diagonally. Horizontally. It's horizontally. I don't know what I'm thinking. Anyways, cutting it straight across and then going in upward strokes so it doesn't look like 4-year-old me cut it, and trying to give it a more seamless but messy look. Then once that's all finished, what I'm going to be doing is using some metal wire and gluing it to the side pieces so that it gives it that stapled look. And then once that all dries, Chucky is finally finished. This is how he turned out. I think he looks so cool, and if you have any suggestions on what you want me to do in the future, let me know in the comments down below, and if you want to follow me on any social medias, that's in the description. So until then, I'll see you next time.